will be my pleasure to introduce Paul Ingbretson. Paul Ingbretson was the president of the Guild of Boston Artists for the last decade. He was also someone I met when I was at the State House. He was the chairman of the Redress of Grievances Committee in the New Hampshire House. I served on his committee. And it was very exciting. And so he was telling me one day that art is full of politics. And I'm going, okay, what? And we were chatting over lunch, and he said, well, it would be really cool if you could help me tell my story, because I'm a storyteller. And I said, well, it would have to be a really, really, really interesting story. A really interesting story. And he said, well, about 100 years ago, we formed this thing called the Guild of Boston Artists by a guy named Tarbell. And they brought a classical tradition of painting that was almost destroyed. And they preserved it in the world. And I went, oh, well, that almost sounds fascinating. Art, who knew? And so I went and I did some more research, and we found out the founder of the Guild of Boston Artists was a guy named Tarbell. And he painted this picture over here. This was done in the late 1890s. Pretty neat, huh? Paul said, we still do that. And I went, really? And then he was going to prove it to me. He did. Do you guys see this? This was done by Paul this year. The work over here is the work of his students. He teaches, he trains, and has the ability to communicate these skills. Also, the values that were destroyed. And there's a lot of value he's going to talk to you about today. And I'm really, really excited. This is probably the longest introduction you'll have to put up with the entire time you're here. But he asked me to help a little bit. So when we were trying to tell this story, we wanted to go out and frame it for people so they'd understand it. So we took a shot at this. What I learned from Paul was that building a masterpiece is not the finished product. It's from an idea to complete execution. And so we captured the complete execution of this process, where we brought in the same film crew that's here today filming the summit, and they filmed 40 hours of Paul going from a blank canvas to this execution. And he asked me to show that to you. And this is probably not going to look as great as it possibly could, but pretty impressive nonetheless. You can see it in 1080i on YouTube anytime you want. But this is 40 hours in 90 seconds. Wow. Great chess players are ranked by how well they play and who they can beat. Artists, it's a different game. But Paul has a number of his students recognized as life masters. So it's not just can he do it, but he's proved that he can teach it, and he's going to talk to you about how he has worked to preserve that tradition and why it's so important and why it was part of a political agenda to keep you from seeing this type of craftsmanship. Thank you, Paul. Paul Ingbretson. I hope I got that right.
You know, I really appreciate this opportunity. 16 years of age in Denver, the American Opinion Library, which some of you know, the John Birch Society, probably did one of the greatest services of modern times by creating a resource for books not about history, but with the intention of bringing you the original sources. And I began my education in history at the John Birch Society, and one of the pieces, of course, was Ayn Rand, We the Living, Atlas Shrugged. And I don't know if that was actually an official part. I think it wasn't, maybe, but rather the guy who ran the bookstore brought a bunch of his libertarian stuff in, and I read the Fabian Society materials, all sorts of stuff. So I'm very delighted, actually. Here's I want to say, not quite 50 years later, to be standing before you in support of those great values, and in particular, two of them today that I think are so fundamental to everything we do. One of them is from the founders, and Ayn Rand shares the concept, and that is we hold these things to be self-evident. And the whole nature of things conversation that any philosopher with any wit will be talking to you about. You know, we're not talking about how we make the world in our own image. There's a nature to things, and I love that point. And then she talks about the individual. And, to give my mom some credit, and by the way, my wife is in the back, and I'm very pleased to have her here. She's not always with me at these events because we live 2 hours away, but Eleanor, and a couple of my students as well. But the last part of that is my mother was a nonconformist by definition. She was fighting communists in the 1930s in college and pointing out to them what they were saying and why they were lies. And they were trying to recruit her, of course, because she was such a firebrand. But her idea was nonconformity. Well, her idea really was to be yourself, to actually find your destiny. We're talking some very basic things. Is this vibrating because of me?
No, I was turning off the feeds.
Right. Can everyone hear okay? Is the sound okay? All right. So by way of a slow introduction, now thank you, George, for playing these things. George has sort of taught me about marketing. One of the things we've realized, as a lot of conservatives haven't, and I say conservatives, libertarians, the left, the tyrants of our age, the Hitlers, they've outmarketed us, guys, and we're losing in significant ways because of it, and George has made that very clear to me. And I'm standing before you as a guy who's basically, my reputation before, we had a young man come to the Manchester area, and he spoke with some of my students, eventually came to see me, but he said, we all know who you are. You're this guy that nobody knows where he is, or what he's doing, or what's going on, but we keep watching you. And I realized that that's kind of a mistake, if not the major mistake, maybe in sort of some ways of my life. But I thank George for awakening that, or at least for reopening that way of thinking to me. You're looking before you, and this is all just by way of giving you some background of me. You need that. George has probably given you enough, but I'll try to be as quick as I can with that because I think do we have even a half hour? Does anybody have the time in front of us? I think we might have about a half hour. I'm going to have to hustle this. A bunch of you are here to talk about aesthetics. I'm not. Would you believe? I'm here to talk about politics. Oh, good. I would love to, though. I mean, I'm not here, and by the way, as a disclaimer, I am not here to trash in any way with people who work in a different way from me. I don't have any problems with people doing their own thing. Why would I, as a libertarian? But just to give you my background, so what you saw before you was a painting before this, the two violinists, one by Decamp, Joseph Decamp of the Boston School, one by Tarbell. But I'm just going to give you mine first. This is my daughter Chloe on the right. I call this Chloe in the sky with diamonds. She dresses, but she doesn't like to sit. And finally she came in with this hat one day, and I said, will you sit? You got this? She says, well, okay. And then she kept sitting. She kept liking it. And the farther we went, the more she liked it. That actually, in the background, is a classic parents thing, A Star Being Born. That's supposedly from the Hibble. So I'm borrowing some stuff. The one on the left is a dancer. And by the way, that dancer is a 9-hour painting. So, George, we can do this in less than 40 hours. Still life, that was one of those things where I was trying to prove, that was sort of a graduation thing in my life where I was trying to prove that I could do whatever. Now, whatever for us as this kind of painter is to produce great forms and great distribution on the page, great color schemes, and complex forms, complex patterns and all that sort of stuff, all in one piece with a skin that looks like it was more or less flawlessly laid on. So those are the craftsman-like standards. The bottom right is a recent painting. Boston School is all about light. I call this warm and cool. There's the sunroom in the back and the cool light coming in from the side. And you see the room, the shifting of the colors and lights. This is part of the poetry you find in the long looking at light. So that's who I am in that way. Why would I show you this? I was raised in a one-room schoolhouse. Believe it or not, it's the first 2 great years of my life only. But I was educated in a one-room schoolhouse out in Altura, Colorado, which is wheat country, middle of nowhere. Aurora actually has overcome it, so that's how close to nowhere it was. But, and that, along with a portrait by Lincoln, sat in front of me. And I sat there as a 5-year-old, literally as a 5-year-old, looking at this thing, and I kept going from the part that's scribbled to the part that's finished. And I've been doing it ever since. I've been trying to figure this out. I mean, what's a little kid doing? But you sometimes hear stories about why you're in the business you're in. You hear about eye doctors who are in the business because they have eye problems, or someone in their family did, or become doctors because they had a good experience or whatever. I literally was lost, absorbed immediately on sight of this thing with brush marks and noses and the distance between and blank spaces and what that is. And I've been sorting out the problem ever since. The next piece of me, however, as you develop, and this is important for you to begin to understand what I'm trying to do and why it's important, I want to say the left, but excuse the expression, if you don't like that, it's significant. There was a thing that I ran into with Michelangelo we had, as a resource, by the way, when I was a kid, besides that one painting, was Encyclopedia Britannica. That was it. But that was in there. And another one, a more finished version of it. But this is one of the great metaphors of all time. This is the captive slave. This is us. This is us in our skins. This is us in our limits, with our dreams, with all the potential, the incredible power and potential. And so this is one of my models of what great painting can do for us. And this is, of course, if you read Ayn Rand, you'll know why that's significant. I'm also a big fan of the Millet. These were things that influenced me enormously as a young person. This is Millet, who was Virgil-like in his poetry. It was something about the burden of being human, something about the melancholy of it, but it wasn't rejection. And of course, Rodin was a big influence. As a young man, I did a lot of sculpture, and of course, the fluid forms of a Rodin are almost unlike anything in history. A little bit of it comes in earlier on in the Rococo era, but that sculpture up on the left is Victor Hugo. So these are the influences, and then there's this kind of poetry, which if you read R.A.M. Stevenson, which is a terrific read, by the way, he's a fellow student of Sargent's in the studios of Carolus Duran, and he talks about the poetry of light. And you cannot know what he's talking about if you haven't stayed there hour after hour and hour after hour again. And of course, in his case, 20 minutes at a time, because the light changes. And you have to get back there at such and such a time, a minute earlier the next day, and so on, for the light to be the same. And you have to wait for the sun to be out and not have a gray day. But this study of color and light is not, and by the way, in the Impressionist world, Monet does it. I think the rest use it. And this is one of the problems we have in the arts in general, by the way. There's a few innovators and a lot of users, and users who don't actually get it, but they're making art. So those are the influences. That's who I am. That's where I've been. And then there's this. Mass College of Art. Why does Mass College of Art figure in this? I spent a lot of time traveling, looking for a place to study. I really wanted this. I was saturated with love and yearned to do of their work, of the master's work, and yearned to do what they were doing. There's no disconnect. I didn't look up and say, but that's not us, that's not now. I was just there with them. And I think that's one of those things, the great universals of art. We are tied to each other through all times. Art does something really special. We're in a very weird time today. One of the things you expect in education, and you'll hear a conversation about it typically, and then more so even in the public schools today, is you need to help a child find his way, find out what is good for him, what is he to become, and what is he to do. So I had a student, a young man studying with me for a while, and he went over to Mass Art. He wanted to get a degree. And I kept trying to encourage him, you want a degree, or do you want a piece of paper, or do you want to be good? And we have this problem today, unfortunately, but meaning to be good at what? So his counselor asked him that, what can we do for you? How can we help you? How can we help you in your career? And he sat down and he said, I just want to paint like Vermeer. And you know what her response was? To blow your mind. That'll change. That'll change. Just want to paint like Vermeer, that'll change. What is happening? And then I found the same year a brochure in which the president of this school was saying we consider ourselves change agents. Now, that's a really nice word in a way, because I'm a change agent. I'm trying to make you, able. I'm trying to enable you. One of my students came from 2 or 3 different colleges with 2 or 3 different degrees. And she came to me, and after about 8 years with me, she said, thank you for helping me to become what I was trying to become. And these other places tried to direct me. They tried to send me off here and off there. There's something pretty seriously wrong with that. And I don't mean to anything except what have our institutions become? What are they doing? Are they manipulating us? Are they trying to turn us into things? Or are they actually doing what they're supposed to, which is to serve us, to help us get to where we're trying to go? And so significantly what happens, School Art Magazine, I was advertising once at School Art Magazine, trying to help some school teachers with some background so they could take it to children. And I was so disappointed. School Arts Magazine had a good history, an early history. And you can see the painting in the background. It's an old magazine. But there was an article in School Arts Magazine that came out within the month that I was advertising with them, in which a 3rd grade teacher was bragging about how she finally convinced Johnny that the marks in his math paper were just as much art as anything that you do in art. And I'm thinking, not only are we deviating people, but we're destroying logic. Here's a man struggling to get his numbers right, and the marks he's making are somehow art. Are the intentions even the same? Fascinating stuff. This is what's happened. And when you consider, we're talking about some pretty serious injury potentially here, especially if Johnny wants to be an artist. So after traveling and hunting all over the country, not finding, by the way, which is one of those things that people don't realize has happened, there's been a cultural, the culture has been absconded with, and you'll hear, we'll talk about that further in a minute, but so I couldn't find a place to study what I wanted, what I knew I wanted to study in the institutions. One of them was the Art Students League. I had a fun experience. The Art Students League is where Jackson Pollock famously spent most of his time in the cafeteria of the Art Students League. And that was reported to me by one of his fellow students, who was some 80-year-old Robert Beverly Hale, teacher of drawing over there at Art Students League. So I began to study there, and there were some actually fairly good influences there, although every one of them seemed to have to brag about being self-taught. Now, why would that be? Would you brag about being self-taught if you were a student of Newton? Or if you're a student of Michelangelo, would you be bragging about being self-taught? But these guys were saying, well, I decided to be different. I decided I was going to draw the heck out of my pictures. That was one of my teachers. Well, after being there a while and realizing that it wasn't my famous it, and I knew what it was. Isn't that funny that we can know this it without knowing what it really is? And we're on the hunt for it. This is one of them, the libertarian thing. Freedom is one of the its. What is wrong here today? So here we have, I'm making waves, actually. I'm not happy. So I'm sitting in the cafeteria, too. And I'm painting a lot. I'm painting from 7:45 in the morning to 9:45 at night. And I'm painting all day, all night, with models, portrait, figure. That's all they did. So in all of my digging around, though, I was finding that the information really wasn't solid. People were self-taught, and you got no feeling of confidence in what they were telling you, although there were a few good things that were said and some good guys there. And I found they had a library. It was like a little hole in the wall in the basement. I mean, really, a little hole in the wall. To this day, I have a picture of a cave. I mean, I think the walls might have been carved out, you know. I don't think it had straight walls. It was funny. And it's a teeny little thing. Now, one of the things it's not unusual in the arts for people to think there's no reading to be done, right? And I did have a teacher say to me, don't ever read an art book. Just look at the pictures. Well, there's so much information, so many, you know, as much as a lot of painters don't say a lot. They've said some really important things, and they've actually said it all, but you have to do a lot of mining to find it, which means you got to read a lot of books. But among other things, down in that basement was this catalog from 1902 of the drawings of the students. And McMoney is a well-known sculptor on the left. And I'm sorry, these aren't a little bit better, but this is pretty good screening for now. McMoney is one of their guys who's a great, well-known sculptor, a great sculptor. And this one on the right and others just like it were all over these books, and I was sitting there really feeling frustrated. I mean, we were getting 5 minutes of drawing, if you're lucky, 10 minutes, and really go fast and make the thing move. And it's all about gesture and all about suggestion and all about junk, but no studying of nature, no studying of the figure. You would not ever see an hour-long drawing in a drawing class. But anyway, so I went to the register with this little catalog, and I was, of course, being a little bit young at the time. Now I'm different. I was a little bit arrogant. And I said, and I held the book in front of the register, and I said, where's this being taught? Just tell me which floor and which classroom and which teacher. Oh, that's everywhere. That's just, you know, and there were some very odd answers. And of course, there's an incredible level of frustration built up because I knew exactly what I wanted. And when you see it, you recognize it. But there'd been this enormous influence in New York, and that fateful year, 1913, you know, this big armory show. The armory show, where it all turned political. If you weren't writing about left-wing socialist problems, you know, the trash in the streets, ash cans, and the poor run down, and the working poor, and all this stuff, and you just were missing something. These people were the anarchists. They're the leftists of their day, the entire Ashcan group, almost. And I don't fault the subject matter, by the way. There isn't any kind of an issue. But if you weren't doing it, who were you? And, of course, this fed eventually into the WPA. But you can already see standards of drawing are falling apart seriously. The one on the right is Matisse. They created this big thing called the Armory Show in New York, and they brought in all the abstract stuff. This is the Ashcan School bringing all the abstract stuff. And by the way, I don't have any problem with abstract stuff. But they created this enormous show that sent shockwaves through America. But it wasn't the beginning of anything. It was actually a concert. It was Kandinsky in the modern abstract expressionist stuff. He sort of started. He's considered the father of abstract painting. And he's operating in the 1880s. I want to say even sooner, earlier than that. And he's coming out of Russia, and he was actually part of their upheaval. He was part of creating the revolution in Russia. Kandinsky, his revolutionary mentality, his throwing out, you know, everything must be gotten rid of, you know, became the byword for almost all of the modern isms. And But this is the beginning of the establishment shift, and the Art Students League was this is what had happened. They had actually become influenced by the Sawyers and a few others, and it was all about not whether you could draw well, even for your subject, but whether or not you were painting with the right political agenda. So this is the museum school in Boston. This is the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. They had an art museum school in Boston, and that same year, there was a transition in Boston. And Boston's art museum school had been run by the artists. Tarbell was the head of the museum school. The teachers were Joseph Decamp, and I'm going to show you their pictures a little bit later. You'll see why this is pretty impressive. But the Ashcan school doesn't look like they know anything about what they're doing when you see these guys. But at that year, in 1913, they decided to make a shift. and the administrators were now going to run the schools. So artists would no longer be in charge of what was being taught or who was hired and all the rest. And the decline was immediate. But these guys all resigned in protest. And but anyway, you're seeing something very strange, though. So keep watching the trail of this thing. So simultaneously, virtually simultaneously, all across the country. And I don't believe, this is not a conspiracy thing. I'm not going to tell you I don't believe in conspiracies because it'd be insane not to believe because they're all over the world and all over history. But what in the heck happened? I was talking to a young man who came over from the Royal Academy. And he said, it's just become okay again for us to paint portraits. He says, it's okay again because some modern abstract painter is now painting heads, things that sort of look like heads. And so now we're all doing it. It's all we ever wanted to do. But he talks about how at the Royal Academy, he said, they took their casts. They got all the students together. We were teaching cast drawing. These casts represent some of the finest sculptures of history, and students were learning not just art, but they're learning to draw. But they were learning art, they were learning the history, but visually, the way artists need to learn, by making them, by copying them. And they're copying them in sculpture, they're copying them in paint. He said they took these casts, they got the students all to take one. And you got to do that, it helps your sensitivity training sort of thing, you know what I mean? So everybody takes a cast and they marched over to the Thames and they dumped them in the Thames. The education is being destroyed. They're dumping it. Well, do you think that's interesting? The Art Students League did the same thing to the East River and dumped. Pennsylvania Academy, I was told they threw them down the elevator shaft. This is happening in art schools all over the entire country. The Beaux-Arts, one of my students just came back from the Beaux-Arts. Now, the Beaux-Arts, the École des Beaux-Arts, was the leading place for anyone, American or anybody else, to study drawing at one point for a lot of years. Probably not for 100 years, but for a lot of years. and so one of my students was over there visiting, and so I said, so where are the drawing classes held? You know what their register told him? We don't do that anymore. There is no drawing. We do happenings now. We do installations. Gee. Now, someone like me, how many people are there like me, young people coming up, who actually only care and love this thing? The elevation of man, the elevation, the ennobling of man that Cicero talks about, how many of us are having our legs cut out from under us? And how much of us is cultural destruction, actually? And what's the point? What are we doing? So, just to give you these are a couple drawings by my students, to give you an idea of what used to happen and what we still do now. I do. This is, I need to talk to you about R.H. Ives Gammell. I'm going to get to that in a minute, but because Gammell wasn't sleeping out there. Gammell was this one guy who seemed to be in the middle of nowhere, studied with those people I've mentioned at the museum school, just before they shut down, and for a few years before that, of course. But I found him, these Art Students League's conversations eventually led somewhere. It's very funny. I was sitting I would sometimes, and I'm not political. I really don't do this. I mean, I look like I do, but I really don't do this easily. I've been stressed for 3 days. My stomach's feeling much better right now. Thank you. But I would sit in the cafeteria of the Art Students League and complain and talk, make noise. It's what we all need to do when things aren't right? Isn't it our job? You may not know how to fix it, but you got to make some noise. You got to actually say, "Is there a problem? Does anybody see anything?" I smell smoke. It's good, right? So in that conversation, somebody said to me, "You need to read Gammell's book." Gammell wrote a book called The Twilight of Painting. I said, "Here it is. I brought it for you. So you got to read this." And here's Gammell, and it's written in 1947. So of course, I assume he's dead. And so even though I'm reading it and it's amazing, there's no hope. This doesn't do anything for me except maybe more frustrated. And yet, it wasn't even, I don't know if it was 3 or 4 weeks later, and I was really holding forth now, right? With apologies to all those serious artists who are there trying to get this right. And somebody walks in and he says, "By the way, I'm going down to Chinatown. I'm going to meet with some Gammell students tomorrow. You want to go with us?" And I thought I was going to die right there on the spot, because what? this guy's talking this way. I don't know if he was any good. I hadn't seen any of his work or anything like that. I hadn't certainly seen any of his students' work. But I said, are you kidding? And I was, of course, there with them. We had a fantastic night, and it wasn't long before I was in the studio. But they came to the classroom where I was working, and they showed me one piece of information that changed my drawing forever. And I'd been the art students like for over 2 years at this point. How is it nobody can tell you about Da Vinci's line of shadow? How is it you can be drawing like crazy and not to know there is such a thing? And it's crucial to understanding everything in the visual world in terms of making a likeness. It's erased. It's erased. Some erasers going on for the sake of what? Political correctness? The Ashcan stuff. So with apologies to all you guys, and I don't mean to say I hate the Ashcan. There's a lot of stuff at the Ashcan level that I really do actually like. I mean, in their milieu, there's a bunch of them. And I'm not going to pick on them. I have no intention of doing that here. In fact, I'm going to show you some guys I really like, so, in that class. So if you really want to know what's happening out there, what the scene is today, as opposed to what we've been talking about, the great elevating arts, the idea of ennobling man, the idea of beauty and truth and goodness, but the elevation of man is the heart and soul. If you read anybody who's talking about anything, it's something to do with something like that, right? And you've got to be inspired. You've got to be in love, right? You don't want to be spending your life attacking things. Do you really? Unless you have a greater idea. And you'll find that some of these guys say they do. It's utopia. But Flash Art, it claims to be the most important magazine in the world, and Art News, and you see the Trash Can School take off on the Ashcan School. These two magazines, if you just look through them, you will see what is happening in the world today. And make no mistake, it is what's happening in the establishment, in the institutions today. It's fundamentally what's happening. If they're going to do any realism at all, it's to trash realism. It's to do goofy things to nature. It's not the long studies looking for the poetry. It's not to derive truth. It's making our own statement, preferably a political one, often a negative one. It's tough stuff, and it's not all that. So again, I want to do that with a disclaimer. It's not all that, but it's significantly that, hugely that. One of the young women, this young man who was who had gone to the Mass College of Art and was studying with me, he said, so one young woman won a prize at Mass College of Art, and he said it was amazing. She when it came around the corner, and she was in a dark studio classroom, and she said, and I heard crying. So I went around the corner, there she was. She's crying. He said, what the heck is the matter with you? You must be happy as heck. Is that why you're crying? She says, no, I have no idea what I did. I have no idea why I got a prize. What did I do? No achievement. What is that? So you're talking about that world. If you haven't read The Painted Word, you're in for the delight of your life. The Painted Word is fascinating. A thing started with the Museum of Modern Art where they decided to explain why this is still the same thing. And the Museum of Modern Art was established by the Rockefellers, with the Crown and Shields and all the rest of their friends and so on. But Tom Wolfe talks about it. But in The Triumph of American Painting by Sandler, he actually says that abstract expressionism, which is you're seeing it there, it's Jackson Pollock, it's the thrown slobs of paint that just don't ever, they go out of their way to make sure they don't look like anything real. But it's just where the reductionist thing, where architecture is just a pile of rocks, well, paintings are just paint on canvases, right? And so it's reductionist. But he says, and this is where I want to give you some credit to Jackson Pollock, or some empathy with Jackson Pollock. But he says the art establishment. I should get you the exact phrase. I don't have it in front of me. But he fundamentally says the art establishment, the takeover of the art establishment by the left, by the takeover of art by the establishment, I take that back, is what led to abstract painting. So here's Jackson Pollock. You know that in 1940, 30, whatever he was working, he couldn't get it. I mean, the shift from 1910 to 1920 is complete. The drawing's gone from great to just nothing. There's no education going on. So here's Jackson Pollock. Am I running out of time? Oh, boy, this is not good. So how much exact time do I have?
10 minutes.
10 minutes? Oh, good. Thank you. But I should be able to handle this pretty quickly. I want to make sure that I take a couple minutes and talk about why this isn't all over yet, because the resistance is here. I mean, I'm part of it. So, the Cultural Cold War. You may have seen this book. Shows how Rockefeller and their friends, who owned thousands of these paintings, these abstract paintings, before they had any value whatsoever, cynically used the CIA and your tax dollars to promote them all over Europe. They literally were promoting love. You know what the reason, you know what they were saying? Is to show that we're more free than the rest of the world. While they were squelching me and my kind of thinking over in America. What's new, huh? With the establishment. What's new? When I was a young man in the Army, they stood before me and said, you know, you were drafted. I'm sitting there drafted with 200 guys drafted. And I'm sitting there and they say to me, so we're fighting for the Cambodian, the liberty of the Cambodians, the freedom of the Cambodians. I said, well, I raised my hand back in the 2/3 of the way back in this little old room, or big old room, 200 guys. And they answered my hand. I said, yes. What happened to my freedom? I don't believe you. How can I help me? The guy didn't have an answer, would you believe? Of course, he's just in the service of the establishment, whatever the heck they're doing with these wars in our men's lives, but that's another story. UNESCO has been polling, would you believe, has been polling Americans. Now, that's the establishment's arm, the New World Order arm, right? They're polling Americans to see how they like modern art, modern abstraction. They've never gotten above 20% of people that even think it's amusing, so I guess there's hope. And then, so I could talk quickly about the Fogg Art Museum, the creation of the Curator's School, and they quickly took over all the museums, virtually all the important museums in the country, and began directing their policies. The policies of buying pictures had always been directed by quality experts in the field, painters. They would always consult with painters before they bought pictures. Even before they bought a Raphael, they would talk to the painter if the guy was a good painter, or was known to be a good painter. That changed, that shifted dramatically. They began deaccessioning these paintings. They began deaccessioning these paintings out the backs of the museums. The picture there, the book, Booth Tarkington was intimately familiar. He writes on the galleries. He was intimately familiar with many gallery owners. He was telling how they were getting pictures like this. I could have bought these in New York for $1,500 in the 1970s. These things are worth upwards of millions of dollars now, but all in the hundreds of thousands, typically at auction. So, in the meantime, though, part of what's going on, the reason these curators were useful is because they don't know anything about American art. Here's a book. If you ever get a chance, find this book. It's going to destroy all the value for my students. You guys hurry up and go get your own copies first. But this has hundreds of amazing pictures. You will not believe how good, how great the world of American art was at that shift when this all started taking place. You won't believe what they've done to undercut a culture. And really, I'm saying, to undercut me, to undercut my destiny, right? And so let's see how fast I can get through. So in the meantime, they're also taking in, while they were deaccessioning those guys, who were they bringing in at 10 times the price they'd ever sold for in the past? Pollock had been selling for $6,000. They bought up Jackson Pollock unnecessarily for $67,000. What are they doing but hyping up their own little world? George, tell us about marketing, right? All right. In the meantime, the ICA was developed by the Guggenheims. And what's the purpose of the IDA? The ICA? Perpetual revolution. And so I would talk about this is one of their painters. I want to show you how this. You watch that for a second, right? This is actually a representational painting, and you see they're borrowing the abstraction. So it is very much a borrowed thing. But I wanted to say one thing before I run off very far, and that is that right here, this is Yogi Kepesh, and there's Leighton on the right. That painting by Yogi Kepesh is beautiful as heck, in texture and color, and full of emotive poetry, right? I don't trash all abstract painting. And I use this as a model for my students of what a good color scheme can look like. It actually sort of exceeds a little bit the Leighton, right? The Leighton looks a little tired. Of course, it might be a lousy photograph. That Leighton is a stunning painting, and that's, of course, one of the great academic painters of the 19th century. That we're trashing as being irrelevant, by the way. And by the way, I wanted to say about that history book, the history books have been changed. They will go from Sargent, because they have to deal with Sargent because he's so big, and they'll skip everybody. They'll skip the Boston School, which you'll see some of in a second. They'll skip over all this stuff to get us to Aikens in the beginning of the political involvement, the negativity. So, all right, I got 2 more minutes, right? I really planned this good. I shouldn't have been so greedy to get my stuff up there at the beginning. This is Gammell, and I'll just end with this little conversation as we close out. I want to just show you where we are. Gammell began to teach. This is my teacher. He did a series, those series of verticals. I think there's, say about 12, 15 of those things, and they are Jungian, rather, interpretations of the Hound of Heaven poem, which are fascinating as heck. But that's Gammell was coming out of a Boston School training. Was the guy who said, "I've got now personally to make this happen." The head of the Twilight of Painting. So this is Paxton, his most primary teacher. Paxton laying in a nude the way we do, the way you saw me do it. This is Tarbell, the head of the Boston School. That's one of the great portraits of all time in America, one of the great American portraits. And there's the other kind of work he did. This is Benson, outdoors, indoors. This is the combination of Impressionism and good drawing and not losing the pieces while they brought color to the whole game. And this is Decamp. And I don't know if anybody outdoes Decamp in any way. So I teach. This is what I do. In the meantime, simultaneously, I'm not promoting the Art Renewal Center, but the war has been joined. And so now there are ateliers, there are studios trying to do what I'm doing all over America. I'm proud to be one of them. I might be the oldest one of them right now. One of the other ones died recently. So I'm on that end of the wheel. But I'm not a huge fan of the adoption of Bouguereau as the great wonder. But I just want you to know that these guys are active and well. They're doing what they believe in. They're having to figure it out for themselves, but they're not taking their eye off the ball. And the establishment, well, some of them get too upset about the establishment. I tell you, they spend too much time. One of them painted a painting that would have been a nice painting, except it was so negative. It was an attack on the establishment. Why would we do that? Great art doesn't do that. So we have our own. We also have people who can do representational painting. They're doing Shock Your Grandmother with representational painting. It's an abuse. It's an abuse of a trust. So let's not be doing that, guys. But that's where we are. That's where we've been. Sorry I'm speaking so fast. I think I covered it all. And I'd love to talk about aesthetics some other day. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Joe.